morning and welcome back to the Strawbale Toolshed build. Today is day 4 and we're working on the roof. If you haven't seen our previous episodes, I'll leave a link in the description below. In the last episode we worked on the box beams, and the box beams sit on top of the bale walls and are secured to the bales as well as the foundation using strapping material. So today I'm going to start with a clear story which is going to run the entire width of the front of the building, and it's going to be 18 inches tall. And what this is going to do is it's going to give us additional light inside the tool shed since we have no windows, and it's also going to provide us with the proper angle to get a pitch of 312 on our roof. So let's get going. So as I mentioned, we're going to begin with a clear story, and it's going to be the entire width of the front of the building, 18 inches tall, and what that'll do is provide us with a 312 pitch going to the back wall of the tool shed. So here's the plan. I need a frame that's going to be 140 3/4 wide and a total of 18 tall, including the top plate and the sill plate, which will be a total of 3 inches. So I need to cut 2 times 140 3/4 and 10 times 15 inches out of 2x4. So I've set up my sliding miter saw, and I'm going to make a stop so that I can get 15-inch pieces exactly right, and then I'll make the two 140 by 3 3/4 inch long pieces. I took the necessary 2 or 3 minutes to set up a stop on my miter saw, and what this allowed me to do was make 15-inch studs without having to measure each individual piece, and they all turned out to be exactly the same size. It's a good practice to get into. It's not always possible to use a stop, but when it is possible, it's definitely worth it. Now that I have all the pieces cut, I begin assembly. And I really wanted to assemble this using my nail gun, but unfortunately my compressor decided to go on the fritz. As it turns out, the regulator on the compressor needs to be overhauled. So instead of using the nail gun, I was forced to use screws, which isn't a big deal. It's just that screws are more expensive than nails. But it got the job done. And as a side note, I did repair the compressor. It was a piston inside the regulator that was preventing the air from getting to the tool, And I bought a little repair kit off of Amazon and took care of that. So that's up and running again. So back to the assembly. Just using 3-inch exterior grade construction screws and trying to make sure that each one of these little studs, if you will, are both vertical and plumb. Or vertical and square, I guess. So once I get this done, and I'll tell you, you'll notice that I use a lot of clamps. Just when you're working by yourself, having a good amount of clamps, a variety of sizes available, really makes it a lot easier. So now I'm putting on the top plate, and again, just securing it along the whole line with the same screws. So once this is done, I'll be taking it over to the box beam that spans across the front of the tool shed, and this will actually create a clear story. This is going to be covered with a clear corrugated plexiglass, which will give us a large window, if you will, and exterior light coming in. Last night I came out and I put a top plate on this front clear story, and then I put this double 2x4 on the back. This morning I'm going to begin by putting 2x6 pieces running the length of this base plate or top plate combination boards. So I'm going to run 2x6s from here all the way across. I'm also going to run 2x6s from here down to the end, and then from the end of this double 2x4 all the way across, and from this corner to the other corner. Now what this is going to do is not only clean up these edges, but it's going to give us a place that when we start cobbing, we're going to have an overhang of about 1.5 inches right here. And that'll give us a place to bring our earthen plaster right up to that 2x6. I'm not sure where Yvonne was at this moment in time, but she wasn't available to help me, so I needed the help of our ladder to hold the other end of that 2x6 up while I secured it. I'm sure there were many of you out there waiting to see when I was going to put a level on this thing, and you just saw me using a level for the first time. I continue to work my way around the perimeter of the tool shed with the 2x6s, not forgetting my clamps, because even in this situation, they're able to hold the board up for me in place, or close to in place, while I get the screws started. Here I'm trimming out a piece of 2x6 that's going to go over the doorway on the front side of this tool shed. And what I wanted to do was keep the maximum amount of height as possible. Here I'm installing a 2x4, the entire width of the clear story on the top, and what this is doing is it's bringing it out to the same level as the 2x6 below it. Because in between that 2x4 and that 2x6 there's going to be corrugated polycarbonate plexi that's going to be screwed to those vertical studs, and that's going to give us a window allowing us to get a little more natural light into the tool shed. Now that all the other trim work is done, it's time to get started with the rafters. I'm using the framing square here to determine the 212 pitch for the tail of the rafter, and I'm marking it and taking it over to my chop saw. And here you'll see that I do a little bit of fiddling around trying to get it lined up exactly right with the laser. And once I get this cut, I'll be able to mass produce then 9 rafters. So I'm cutting the rafters, and I figured out the pitch on the end, or they should say the angle to cut off at the end of the tail of the rafter, and using the framing square. And then I set it up on the miter saw, and I'm fiddling around with it, and I know my pitch is about 212. Finally got it all lined up, and get to check this out. Right there, 212 pitch. Right there, all I had to do was set it to the 212 pitch. So I have a couple rafters prepared, and I actually have my first bird's mouth cut into this rafter, and I'm about to secure this for the first time. And I'm going to be using timber lock screws, which were recommended by one of the viewers in a previous video. And they're very impressive looking 6-inch long screws, and they're actually designed just for this purpose. Here goes nothing. God, I hope maybe I should pre-drill it. Should have pre-drilled. It is what it is. Now I know. Got to pre-drill. I'm going to try this again, and I'm going to pre-drill this time. Sweet, pre-drilling. Learning from my mistakes. Here I'm just figuring out the rafter layout. What I ended up doing was excluding the overhang of 16 inches on either side of the Strawbale walls, and then just marking 24 on center, starting at the edge of the box beams. So I got a lot of trim work done today, and I've only got 2 rafters up. It took me a while to kind of figure out the bird's mouth. And it was funny. I went online, I looked at videos about how to use your framing square to create the bird's mouth. And the framing square for the pitch, or for cutting the angle on the rafter where it hangs over, that worked fantastic. But I just couldn't get it to work right and fit nicely using that technique that I learned. So I went back to the tried and true method of just kind of like doing it. You know what I mean? all I did really was I set the rafter up there. I used my framing square, and I continued the line from that double 2x4 vertical, and then I set a level on top of the beam, if you will, and drew a line going across. And then I just made sure that that line going across ended right where I needed it to end, which is about 5 inches right there. So now on to the fun part, the installation of the rafters. What I'm doing is I'm taking the 2x6 rafters, and the ends have already been cut to the proper angle, and I'm clamping it down, and then I'm going to mark for the bird's mouth. After I get done marking it, I then take it down over to the sawhorses, and we'll use a circular saw and a jigsaw to make the final cuts. As much as I would have liked to have used one rafter as a template, there was just too many variations in the twisting and the cupping of the wood, so each rafter did have to be marked and cut individually. With only 9 rafters, though, it's not a big deal. With the 2x6 marked, I'm back at the sawhorses using a jigsaw and a circular saw to complete the bird's mouth. The small little vertical I do with the jigsaw, then I grab my circular saw to do that 5-inch angle cut. I do have to finish it off with the jigsaw. Back to the shed. The now properly cut rafter gets put into place, and I'll check that it's 24 on center, and I'll use some of my quick clamps to hold it in place. Then I grab a drill with a countersink bit installed, and I drill a hole in preparation for the timber lock screws. Then it's just a question of repeating the process until all 9 rafters are done. It's at this point I realized maybe I should show you guys what's going on the back side of the shed. So I grab the camera, come back around, and here you can see that the back side's going to get positioned just like on top in the front on the ridge, and clamp down. And here I am using the pre-drill countersink bit and securing the rafter with a timber lock. The weather report is calling for 3 days of rain, so we better get this thing wrapped up. Don't want the straw getting wet. When you build with straw, you got to be careful of the weather. The weather report says we're expecting up to 1.5 inches of rain over the next 36 hours. So we've taken all of our tarps and we've enclosed the building. We thought that was it, but Yvonne said last night, she said, you know, if we get a lot of rain, that's really going to pool in there. So I didn't want to do it, but we broke open a brand new tarp that we have other plans for, you'll see in a future video. And we pulled it up at 16 by 20, and we pulled it up over, starting at the back, we pulled it up over to the, and covered the entire top of it, so it sits on the girders, or the rafters, I should say. And then we bungeed it to the framing. So we are really now hermetically sealed. So all I can say is they're calling for rain. It's looking pretty nice right now. But here in the desert, weather can change really fast, and we want to be ready and not have to do this in the pouring rain. So that's it for this episode. Thanks again for watching. We appreciate your support. If you have any questions about anything we're doing, let us know in the comment box below. In the next episode, we'll be tackling the sheathing as well as the final roofing material. So stay tuned for that. We'll catch you in the next video. Boom!